Hello, my name is Scotia Gilroy, and I'm the translator of The Touch of an Angel by Henryk Schönker, which has just been published by Indiana University Press. Henryk Schönker was born in 1931, and his hometown was Oświęcim, the town that was renamed Auschwitz by the Germans during World War II. Many Holocaust memoirs have been published, but this one is quite unique because it provides a first-hand view of the town of Oświęcim before the creation of the concentration camp there. And then again in 1945, after the war, when the Schönker family decided to return to the town in order to try to resume their lives there, which was quite an unusual thing for a Jewish family to do. Many Jews who survived the war emigrated from Poland shortly afterwards to Israel and elsewhere. I'm going to read a segment from the middle of the book when Henryk and his family were imprisoned in the Bergen-Belsen camp in Germany. It tells the story of a very unusual prisoner who arrives in the camp one day. At the time this happened, Henryk was 12 years old. If you ever go to Krakow, Poland, go to Masulit Bookshop. One morning in late autumn 1943, an open military vehicle drove into our camp, and an SS officer got out of it with a prisoner in civilian clothing. The officer summoned our barrack supervisor. When he appeared, the officer told him he'd brought a very famous person named Professor Eisenman, and we needed to look after him and make sure no harm came to him. He required special care because he was suffering from amnesia and was unable to speak. Doctors hoped he would recover from this condition if he were among other Jews. If Eisenman started talking, we had to inform the squad leader at roll call. The officer left and Professor Eisenman remained with us. By chance, he was brought to our barrack and given the bunk beneath mine. After Eisenman's arrival, many men from our barrack and the other barracks tried to engage him in conversation, but he never responded. He lay on his bunk all day long with a frightened look on his face. People spoke to him in various languages, trying to calm him, but he didn't react. It was obvious he found all these attempts to communicate with him very unpleasant. I felt sorry for him, so I shouted at everyone from my top bunk to leave him alone. But some people, not having anything else to do, treated it as a kind of sport and tried to prove themselves capable of bringing Professor Eisenman back to life. One night, I was awoken by the sensation of someone jabbing me in the back. I opened my eyes. It was dark in the barrack with only a little light coming from the fire burning in the iron stove. My bunk was close to the stove and my eyes quickly grew accustomed to the darkness. I began to distinguish the contours of other bunks and the men sleeping on them beneath blankets. I sat up and looked around, but there was nobody near me. I thought I must have been dreaming and lay down again. A moment later I felt, this time without any doubt, someone jabbing me in the back. I looked down at Professor Eisenman. His leg was pressed against the boards beneath my straw mattress, and he was signaling for me to come down to him quietly. I slipped from my bunk like a cat and kneeled next to him so that my face was close to his. In broken Polish, he asked me, in a whisper, to summon our barrack supervisor. Now? I asked. He nodded. I tiptoed quietly to the supervisor's bunk and gently woke him. He hurried over to Professor Eisenman and told me to go back to sleep. I was the only one to see them because everyone else was sleeping. I didn't know how long they talked because I fell asleep quickly. I didn't tell anyone about this. However, it was clear now that our barrack supervisor had shared Professor Eisenman's secret with several trusted people, for I noticed them conversing discreetly. By that afternoon, rumors were beginning to circulate in our barrack. In the evening, it was decided to put a stop to them. The barrack door was closed and, with Eisenman's permission, our supervisor told everyone about their conversation and asked them to leave Eisenman in peace from that moment onward and not to speak about him with anyone. It turned out that Eisenman was really named Sudik Mendelssohn, and he didn't have any connection whatsoever with the real Professor Eisenman. He was a completely uneducated person. Before the war, he had run a vegetable stall in the Jewish district of Warsaw. Later, he had worked for an undertaker. Nearly everyone spoke Yiddish in Warsaw's Jewish district, and this was Mendelssohn's mother tongue. He spoke Polish very poorly. During the war, he'd started working as a gravedigger in the Warsaw Ghetto. One day, while transporting a corpse on a cart, he had searched the dead man's pockets and found foreign documents bearing the name Eisenman. By chance, the person in the photograph on the identity documents looked similar to him. The real Professor Eisenman had come to Warsaw for an academic conference, and the war had taken him by surprise there, making it impossible for him to leave Poland. Presumably, he'd been afraid of reporting to the Germans and had gone to the ghetto along with other Jews, where he'd been shot. The gravedigger, no longer having anything to lose, had reported to the Germans as Eisenman. He had no idea the Germans had been looking for this professor already for some time, because the foreign academic community was willing to pay a large sum of money for his freedom. All diplomatic posts in Poland had been told to look for Professor Eisenman, but nobody had been able to find him. When the gravedigger reported to the Germans as Eisenman, it caused a huge sensation. Mendelssohn figured out that Professor Eisenman was an important person for whom the Germans had been searching. He was overcome by fear that he would be exposed, which would mean instant death. He knew that if he said anything, the Germans would immediately realize he wasn't the man they were looking for, so he had decided to stay quiet and pretend to be mentally disturbed. He didn't answer any questions. He appeared to have lost his memory and his ability to speak. The doctors concluded that he'd been through some very difficult, traumatic experiences, and they sent him to a mental hospital. He was given various tests there, and after a while, he was sent to another hospital, but the treatment there wasn't successful either. There were moments when, no longer able to endure all the medical procedures, he tried to take his own life, but each time the Germans saved him. Finally, they decided to send him to our camp to live among Jews, in the hope that among his own people he would recover his memory and his ability to speak. And that's how he had ended up at Bergen-Belsen. When the supervisor finished telling the story of the gravedigger from the Warsaw Ghetto, there was a long silence, which was broken finally by Eisenman, who said in Yiddish, "And now I want peace and quiet, nothing else. Do you understand, Jews?" Everyone promised not to bother him anymore and to keep the entire matter a secret. Each of us went up to him and shook his hand. Several people kissed him. Eisenman was so overcome by emotion that he cried. For the first time in ages, he was able to be himself. The next day, life continued in our barrack as usual. Eisenman was silent, and everyone left him in peace. If you would like to find out what happened next to the gravedigger from Warsaw, and whether the Germans eventually discovered his true identity, you'll need to buy a copy of the book, which has just been published by Indiana University Press. Thank you.